Good morning, brothers and sisters. Welcome to this new week of study. As we return to our studies in the book of Daniel, shall we seek our Heavenly Father's guidance and ask for his blessing as we open his word and look to understand that which is written for this time. Shall we now pray? Gracious Father in heaven, thank you for these blessings that you have been providing. Help us now, Father, as we open your word, to understand that which you would have us to understand. I thank you for those that are taking time to be involved in this meeting today. I ask a blessing upon them. We ask, Father, for your guidance and your direction so that we may more clearly understand your word of truth. Help us now so that we may seek you in spirit and in truth, so that we may be directed and guided to give the message that you would have us to give at this time in Earth's history. Be with us now, for we invite you into this meeting. Help our hearts to be prepared for that which you would have us to know. For this we thank you, for this we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we return to this portion of the book of Daniel, we were having quite an interesting conversation this last week on these different points. Now, we had been addressing verse 14. Quickly, we will again touch on verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. As Smith wrote, the tuition of the young king of Egypt was entrusted by the Roman Senate to M. Aemilius Lepidus, who appointed Aristomenes, an old and experienced minister of that court, as his guardian. His first act was to provide against the threatened invasion of the two confederated kings, Philip and Antiochus. To this end, he dispatched Scopas, a famous general of Anatolia, then in the service of the Egyptians, into his native country to raise reinforcements for the army. Having equipped an army, he marched into Palestine and Coel, Syria, Antiochus being engaged in a war with Attalus in Lesser Asia, and reduced all of Judea into subjection to the authority of Egypt. So here the Romans were employing a Greek general for service to the Greek king of the Egyptians. Thus affairs were brought into a posture for the fulfillment of the verse before us. For Antiochus, desiring from his war with Attalus at the diction of the Romans, took speedy steps for the recovery of Palestine and Coel, Syria from the hands of the Egyptians. Scopas was sent to oppose him. Near the sources of the Jordan, the two armies met. Scopas was defeated, pursued to Sidon, and there closely besieged. Three of the ablest generals of Egypt, with their best forces, were sent to raise the siege, but without success. At length, Scopas, meeting in the gaunt and intangible specter of famine, a foe with whom he was unable to cope, was forced to surrender on the dishonorable terms of life only, whereupon he and his 10,000 men were suffered to depart stripped and naked. Here was the taking of the most fenced cities by the king of the north, For Sidon was, both in its situation and its defenses, one of the strongest cities of those times. Here was the failure of the arms of the south to withstand, and the failure also of the people with which the king of the south had chosen, namely Scopas and his Ayatollah forces. Now, do we have any comments on this portion at this time?
Well, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this again. So, um, so, so we know that this is going to be events that are connected with what happens in the aftermath of Paneum. We know that Egypt is being supported by Rome in verse 14.
Right.
So this is just the aftermath of what happens with Egypt. So Egypt is going to be supported by Rome so that the king of the north doesn't dominate. And then you're going to have Rome standing in 11 verse 16, the next verse, right? He that cometh again to do according to his own will, and thou shalt stand before him. I just don't remember what particularly there was about this. For some reason, my brain isn't pulling this together. So the most fenced cities, we know that was like Sidon, and right. So okay, so the people of his choice. So that was one thing that we did differently. And so what we had is in our present truth application as well. So here's what I have. So the king of the north, that's Antiochus III, the USA, is how we're going to apply it present truth. And I know we're not usually looking at the present truth here.
Right.
But we're saying that this is circa 200 BC. So this is the Battle of Paneum in that time. Then so we align that with November 9th, 1989. And cast up a mount. So there's this siege, and we're taking that as representing the economic pressure that happened prior to 1989, right? So that was occurring. That's what led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. And take the most fenced cities, so Judea and Sidon being one of those, that this is the apostate Protestant churches are conquered at 1989. And the arms of the South. So here this is representing the Soviet Union in our history, right, 1989. And Egyptian army under Ptolemy V, that's atheistic communism in the present truth, shall not withstand or stand up is the idea. That is, they're going to lose the Battle of Paneum, November 9th, 1989. Neither his chosen people, that is the choicest people, that is the global elites, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So the reason why I mentioned the present truth one here is that we are taking the Battle of Paneum and we say that it's typical of something. What it's typical of is 1989, as the Battle of Raphia is typical of 1798, right? That's how we understood this.
Okay.
Okay. So, what he's saying in his present truth, or in his historic application. I'm looking over this again. So he has the king of the south, the failure which the king of the south had chosen, right? So I think there's a difference here in who his is referred to. I think that's mainly the difference. So the king of the north shall come against him, cast up a mount, shall take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand. neither his chosen people, he's going to have, uh, so we're taking that as the elites. Okay, so that would be, so who are the chosen people, or the people of his choice in the present truth application? We're saying that it's the elites, but the elites, they exist as part of the king of the south. So that would be the same. So I think
Right.
his interpretation's okay. That from, I thought we had some other point, but sorry that I'm thinking this out loud, but it might help other people um, sort through this. So what is the role of Scopas in this? So that's where I'm heading.
Okay. So here's Scopas,
Hmm.
a Greek who is sent to defend the armies of Egypt, or to lead the armies of Egypt. He goes in to a battle, wins the first in 217, but loses the second in 200. So we were addressing that 217 was a symbol of midnight.
Yeah.
Now, is 200 a symbol of the midnight cry, or does 191 become the symbol of the midnight cry?
Hmm. Well, we don't know exactly which year the Battle of Panium occurred, but we do know it's around 200. It's one
Correct.
of those ones they don't have an exact date. Okay. Well, let's. Well, I don't. I don't know. I don't think we're going to take 200 as a symbol of the midnight cry. Okay. Now, Scopas, of course, he's an Aetolian general, but
Right.
he's being brought about because of Rome, right?
Correct.
So we have Rome here involved in the Battle of Panium. Um, Now Rome is representing uh, in 1989, representing the papacy. Is that how it is?
I would think so.
Okay, I think that's how we would look at it. So we got Rome. So how do we look at this? So how does he get Scopus in there? Like, what is he? Because in our historic application that we have, we don't mention Scopus by name in this. So what is the key that he has for bringing in Scopus? Is that representing the global elites? That doesn't make sense. The choicest people? That doesn't make sense. Because he's taking this just as part of the history, but he's not taking it from a specific part of this verse. He's going back to verse 14, right?
I would say so.
Okay. So in verse 14, that the robbers of thy people, um, Rome spoke. So I'm just looking back at verse 14. That's where he says, Rome spoke, and Syria and Macedonia soon found a change coming over the aspect of their dream. The Romans interfered in behalf of the young king of Egypt. So this is 200 BC. So he's going back to that verse, and it's so Scopus is not mentioned by name, but it must be uh, from verse 14. Okay. Um, but he doesn't mention in his commentary on verse 14, he doesn't mention Scopus. He was going to mention it in verse 15. I don't know. Any thoughts on that? I mean, Scopus is not, he's not mentioned by name. in Daniel 11. But it is the result of the robbers of that people exalting themselves to establish the vision. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Okay. I'm looking to see if I can find where Smith could have addressed Scopas as being part of this situation.
Yeah, he just basically says, because of this threatened invasion, you're going to have Scopas, a famous general of Aetolia, then in the service of the Egyptians, into his native country. So he dispatched Scopas into his native country to raise reinforcements for the army. But after equipping an army, he marched into Palestine and Kol Syria, Antiochus, being engaged in a war with Attalus in Lesser Asia, and reduced all Judea to the authority of Egypt. Right. So it says, thus the affairs were brought about for the fulfillment of the verse before us. So he's saying that all that has to be set in place for this battle of Beneum. It seems to me that, I mean, if I was looking at this verse by itself, I wouldn't see Scopas. But so it's something that Uriah Smith is introducing. And it could be true. I would need to look at this history in a bit more detail. So, because when we dealt with this in not looking at Uriah Smith, we never dealt with Scopas at all. Right. So whether Scopas is really the important issue here or not, we know that Rome is here.
Right.
Because they're supporting them, but the question is exactly how. He's just saying it's Scopas, but he's not directly saying that is Rome, right? So he's not giving us he's not giving us enough information of why he has drawn that conclusion. Just it's from history. So we know they're not going to withstand that. Egypt's going to lose the Battle of Beneum. And so he's just giving us the historical background of that. I'm not really sure, what we should do, whether we should move to the next verse, or do we have any more comments on this?
I was trying to look up how Smith would have come up with source material on this. Some of these things Polybius would have had that, and that would have been something that Smith would have made use of.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do the other commentators say? They get Scopas somewhere.
They're going to have, most of them are going to have Antiochus Epiphanes involved here. So,
is Scopas mentioned in other commentaries then, though? That's my question, I guess.
Not that I know of.
Okay, Scopas is mentioned fairly extensively in a book that's in the public domain, Dictionary of Greek and Roman Biography and Mythology, that was published in 1870, which is the time in which this article was published, by a William Smith. So I would have my problems with a lot of the other commentators because I don't see the involvement of Epiphanes in this at all, but I do see Antiochus the Great.
Yeah. So Albert Barnes, he does, he's similar to Uriah Smith's position. So here's what Albert Barnes says. So neither is chosen people. He's going to say the people of his choices, those whom he had selected or chosen to carry on the war, referring perhaps to the fact that he would deem it necessary to employ picked men or to send the choicest of his forces in order to withstand Antiochus. So Antiochus the Great, that is Antiochus III, right? Such occurrence is in every way possible. To illustrate this, it is only necessary to say that the Egyptians sent 3 of their most distinguished generals with a select army to deliver Sidon, Europus, Menocles, and Demoxenus. And then so then neither shall there be any strength to withstand, no forces which the Egyptians can employ. In other words, Antiochus would carry all before him. This is in strict accordance with the history when Scopas was defeated by Antiochus at Paneas, that is Paneum,
Right.
near the sources of the Jordan. He fled and entrenched himself in Sidon. There he was followed and besieged by Antiochus. The king of Egypt sent the 3 generals above named with a choice army to endeavor to deliver Scopas, but they were unable. Scopas was obliged to surrender in consequence of famine, and the choicest forces returned to Egypt. So if we're going to deal with, so this makes sense, actually. I mean, just the background history of what's happened, why Scopas is mentioned, because he's going to be involved in this battle of Paneum historically. So the question is, where is he mentioned in this verse 15?
Is Scopas one of the chosen people?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. So his chosen people, is that the chosen people of the king of the south, or is that the chosen people of the king of the north? Right.
I would almost think chosen people of the king of the south.
Yeah, because when it says neither his chosen people, they're the way that they're putting the neither in there is it's in the next part. So neither his chosen people. And then it says neither shall there be any strength to withstand. Well, the neither is only in the last phrase. It's not in the they shall not withstand the people of his choice. So that would be the kings of so they're saying neither shall he withstand, the people of his choice shall not withstand. Right? That is, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So I'm trying to look at the Hebrew here. Just I know we kind of had sorted this out before, but I don't think completely. And so okay, I see. So yeah, so that's the choicest ones are the king of the south. So that's so that means that the king of the south, if we're going to apply this to 1989, and we have that there are choicest people, that's the elites, right? That's how we applied it. But we're saying that Scopas is someone who comes from Rome. So Rome is in this context, it's neither the king of the south or the king of the north, correct?
Right.
Now, in 1989, well, the king of the north is the United States with the papacy. Could we say that the papacy is also connected to the Soviet Union? That there is, because we always say, well, the papacy is trying to overthrow the Soviet Union, right? That's
correct.
what the papacy is doing. But is there some way in that the papacy is still behind things in the Soviet Union? That there's a purpose there. What about Mikhail Gorbachev? Now he's going to be the one who brings the Soviet Union to an end. Is there any way that he's connected to to Scopas. Because in 1989, if we equate this to the Battle of Paneum, what kind of battle is it? It's this economic and military pressure is brought against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, it ends, right? There isn't a battle per se in the way that we would normally think of it. We don't have a full-out war against the United States and the Soviet Union. Or would we say that Scopus represents, I don't know, it would have to be something connected with the Soviet Union, but we're saying if we're paralleling it to 1989, could we say that in some way that the papacy has a connection within the Soviet Union that causes this to happen? Or would we have Scopus as being something to do with Lech Walesa? Or would that make more sense? That might make more sense.
But why Lech Walesa?
Well, it's just because I'm looking at a force that's connected to the papacy that's bringing down the Soviet Union, but not directly connected. So
Are you
now,
looking at Walesa because of his leadership in the Solidarity movement and his connection with John Paul II?
yeah. But, Scopus is supposed to be the general supporting them, the Soviet Union. I mean, right. Do you understand what I'm saying? So,
Right.
so Lech Walesa doesn't maybe make sense. We don't have him in our interpretation of that verse in the present truth application. We don't have Scopus being marked out, right? That's basically the problem that I'm struggling with. But we don't have Scopus mentioned directly in verse 15. We just have Rome. So the way that we did it here, so if you look at verse 14, here's what we have in the present truth. And in those times, the Soviet-Afghan War of 3,341 days, there shall many, Reagan and Pope John Paul II, stand up, that is, make war. And that war is going to be the Solidarity movement. That's what we had against the King of the South, the Soviet Union, and the robbers of thy people, or the breakers of thy people, right? We're connecting that to from 1863 to 1989, the 126 shekels of Daniel 5 are all mentioned in there, the Sheba the 7 times, right? So we know that this is related to that 126 years from 1863 to 1989. That's what we're connecting. So the breakers of that people, we're making that application of thy people, that is Rome, right? The papacy shall exalt themselves to themselves to support the Polish trade unions to establish the vision, right? So that's what happens in 1989. So we have Pope John Paul. They're going to make war through this solidarity movement against the Soviet Union, right? And so Rome exalts itself to establish the vision. In our history, that's going to be the papacy that exalts themselves to establish the vision. And they do that through the support of the Polish trade union. So that would have to be Lech Walesa would be the one that connects with Scopas. And the chosen people, the peoples of thy choice later on, that's going to be this group that comes out of the Soviet Union. So when we have in verse 15, So the king of the north, which in this case is the United States. So we always say sort of, the king of the north is the papacy in connection with the United States. But here it's basically representing what the United States does. November 9th, 1989, through this economic and military pressure, take the Protestant churches, right? The most fenced cities, the Protestant churches, the apostate Protestant churches, and the Soviet Union, that is atheistic communism, right? The king of the South shall not stand up. That is, it's not that they don't withstand, they don't stand up. Historically, Egypt does not become the next kingdom. They lose the Battle of Panium. So that's November 9th, 1989. Neither so we say the Battle of Panium. The choicest people, the global elites, neither shall there be any strength to withstand or to stand up. So part of the idea that we had here is that historically we have these different kingdoms, and these different kingdoms stand up, right, to do according to their will. But that doesn't happen with the king of the South. It doesn't, it's not the kingdom that's established. So if we go back and we look at Greece stands up, and that's going to be through the king doing according to his will. In that context is going to be Alexander the Great. Then his kingdom is divided, and all these civil wars occur. But none of these kingdoms are the next kingdom of Bible prophecy. The next kingdom of Bible prophecy is Rome, the one that exalts itself to establish the vision. Is that making sense?
It is to me.
Okay. And so then in our history, we have the Soviet Union, right? There is this battle that's going on between the king of the north and the king of the south, right? And the United States. So there's this battle going, what we would call, in a sense, the Cold War, right? It's going to be heightened. The papacy is going to come along and get involved in it, right, in the 1980s. And then when the Soviet Union falls, there is an elite that comes out. So that means the Soviet Union falls, and it doesn't establish itself. It doesn't exalt itself to establish the vision. It's going to be the papacy that does. And the United States doesn't become, Rome. It's going to be connected with Rome, but it's going to be Rome that is the power here historically. And in our history, that's going to be the papacy, right? So in verse 16, when it says he, the papacy that cometh against him, that is, the papacy is going to come and conquer the United States. So it's going to come against Seleucid Syria. So next thing in verse 16 is we're going to have, he shall do according to his own will. And that's going to be 191 BC. So that one's going to line up with December 25th, 1991. So the Battle of Panium is going to line up with November 9th, 2019. But on December 25th, 1991, what we see is that in that battle between the king of the north and the king of the south, the papacy is the one that ends up exalting itself to establish the vision, right? It's going to be the one there. And so when the Soviet Union falls, none shall stand before, it says before him, right? And we put, well, that will subjugate Syria and become the next king of the north, right? So we had there that's going to be the New World Order under George Bush the first, 9/11, becomes the next king of the north. That is, pagan Rome, under Pompey the Great, that is, the papacy, shall stand in the glorious land. And that's going to be 9/11. That's what we had. So that's when the global elites, the New World Order, conquer the United States. So the United States is conquered. And what this would then imply is that this New World Order is the result of Rome coming in to establish the vision. Rome is conquering the United States, or really the global elites are. And those are the ones, so the people of his choice would then have to be referring to the his, neither his chosen people. That would have to refer to these global elites. And those are connected to Rome. Does that make sense?
How does that tie in or whatever relate to Trump resisting the global elite?
Well, that's in this history. We don't have
or is
Trump
it a play?
yet. So what's going to happen later on
Yeah.
is, you're saying, yeah. So what's going to happen
Yeah.
later on is we have this king of the north and the king of the south established. That is, the king of the south is still, we would say that the global elites, that is, globalists, are connected with the papacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though they're a
would.
separate power, right? Because the papacy is we got the city of Babylon, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. All of these
Mm-hmm.
are part of Babylon. And we know that Babylon itself is Mystery Babylon Great, the mother of harlots, right? So we know that that's Babylon, but it
Mhm.
has three aspects of it. That this mystery called this Babylon, the papacy, is behind all of these three aspects of Babylon, right? Both the United States,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
spiritualism. But there is a battle that goes on in order for that threefold union to finally take shape, and that's going to be under the Sunday law, right? So we have, in a sense, the United States is conquered by the papacy in 1989, and then at 9/11, the United States is conquered by the globalists. That is, the United States is joining
How
hands
does the
with this power.
papacy?
Okay.
How does the papacy conquer the U.S. in '89?
Well, we could say the United States reaches its hands across the Gulf to join hands with the Roman power. And in doing so, it's an alliance with the papacy. At 9/11.
What year was it that? Was it Reagan or who? No. Anyway, who was it that the first president or the president to reappoint political ambassador to the Vatican? That happened in 19 something. I actually have the article
19
from the newspaper when that happened.
That's Reagan.
Reagan, yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of think of that as joining
Yes.
the papacy.
Yeah. So that's happening behind the scenes, right? In that period, what we call so Reagan and Pope John Paul stand up, right? That's in verse 14. In those times, there shall be many, Philip V, king of Macedon, and Antiochus III. And we put those to Reagan and Pope John Paul II stand up. That is, they make war. And that's going to be the solidarity movement against the king of the South. That is the Soviet Union. And that robbers of thy people, right, exalt themselves to establish the vision. Right. So we're saying that is referring to that history prior to 1989.
wonder if the detail of how the papacy supported the union in Poland is, I don't know if it fits anywhere. How did they do it? They had the priests going back and forth with suitcases of American dollars. That's one of the ways that they
Yeah,
funded it.
yeah, yeah.
The solidarity movement.
Right. So that's something within the Soviet Union itself, right? We're saying that that would represent Scopas. So so
Oh,
the
okay.
way that the papacy was involved in the fall of the Soviet Union was behind the scenes in that way, right? Something within. Now we look at Scopas as being this general of Egypt, and he's going to lose the Battle of Pania. So the question is, well, is is this Scopas general symbolic of Lech Walesa, or is it Gorbachev himself? Right. That's the question. I don't know. Dwight, do you have anybody have thoughts on this?
I'm
Is there
looking
some
at
other way?
I'm looking at a couple of different things.
Okay. It's just that Scopas isn't himself mentioned here. Right. We just have Rome exalting itself to establish the vision. And the way that we put this in the present truth application in 1989, in that history prior to 1989, is the papacy supports the Polish trade union. That's what we have. So they're going to make this war. So that war is going to be, all of the things that are happening. Part of that is the solidarity
Was the support coming from the U.S. and the papacy, right?
for the
The
Polish
solidarity
trade
movement.
agreement. Yeah, but it's really Rome
The
behind
way I'm.
that. So if you look at it this way,
Mm-hmm.
The United States, it's going to use the economic and military pressure against the United States, or against the USSR, right? That's the part that the
I
United
was just
States,
going to ask the money. Yeah, the money.
but yeah, but it's going to be through the papacy itself and the support with the Polish trade union that
Papacy
is
is the
going to,
vehicle.
well, it's,
The vehicle.
well, that's the way in which
I
Rome
mean,
is involved, right? So the United States is
mm-hmm.
involved because they're military and economic pressure, because there's this
Mm-hmm.
so we have the
The
King of
ships to
Macedon,
Tarshish.
Philip. Yes. So, yeah. So, well, not, yes, I guess you can say that. That's the economic pressure, right? But you have
Or one of the
Philip, King of
functions of.
Macedon, and Antiochus III. So we said, well, that is going to be, um, Pope John Paul II and Reagan. That's how
Mm.
we put it in the present truth application. We said that there's an
Say that one
alliance
more
here.
time.
We have Philip
Say that one
V,
more time.
King of
Who and who?
Macedon, and Antiochus
Mm-hmm.
III. That is when it says, there shall many stand up against the king of the south, against Egypt, right? Ptolemy the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to say Philip the fifth, king of Macedon, and Antiochus the third. They're going to become, because we see that Egypt could be overthrown by these powers. So Reagan and Pope John Paul II is what we had. And that may not be correct. That may not be the best way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
But we know that,
Mm-hmm.
and we're saying
Sticky
that
tape
this
to
is
it
the
for now.
Soviet-Afghan war. So maybe there's some other way that we should look at this.
Proxy war.
Because who does Philip V, King of Macedon, represent? So we kind of put, well, that's going to be, because we have the United States, and the
What does
Soviet-Afghan war is, what's that?
in the spirit of prophecy? In the spirit of prophecy, I read recently, yesterday or the day before, about the Macedonian cry, and it's in a positive way.
Yeah, but that's a totally different.
Yeah, I just wonder how she's using that. Or you're familiar with that?
I'm familiar with
Phrase?
that. Yeah,
Hmm.
but that has to do with the story in Acts, right? That's
Okay.
in right. So that's
Remind
what
me of that story.
I can't remember the details of it, but it has to do with
Okay.
there's some kind of call. Um, let me see.
I mean, I don't know my history that well, but kind of related it to, I was thinking of the Spartans and the 300 or something, but that's not related, or is it in the same area? Where is Macedonia again?
Well, that's just the northern Greece.
Okay. Is it Greece because it's a part of Greece, or
But it's part of
it was
Greece.
another
I mean,
country or something? Oh,
Alexander the Great was a Macedonian. So this
okay.
is Acts
Like a
16.
province of Greece, a
Yeah.
province
So
of
yeah,
Greece kind of thing. Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
Well, yeah, it's more complicated than that, but it's in Acts 6:16. And the vision appeared to Paul in the night. There stood a man in Macedonia and prayed, saying, "Come even over into Macedonia and help us." So that's the Macedonian cry, the call for help.
Okay. Okay. Great. That's how she was using it for mission work.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Macedonian cry has gone forth, and
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
So we wouldn't apply it here just because we have Philip, king of Macedon. Um, but that's just an interpretation which we got from some other place. I'm not sure exactly where. So we have, let me see. In those times, many shall stand up against the king of the south. So that what we had is that um, after the Battle of Raphia, right, Egypt sort of weakens itself, right? It becomes weak, and the Battle of Panium is going to be when the king of the north conquers the king of the south. But in that history, the
Geographically,
rock, what?
geographically, where were the battles of Panium and Raphia again?
Well, the Battle
Or
of
I
Raphia,
heard it.
yeah. So
Mm,
the Battle of Panium, yeah, is um, in Israel, right? That's going to be at Caesarea Philippi. That's where when Jesus says to Peter, uh, you know, thou art Peter, but upon this rock I shall build
mm-hmm,
my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. That's where they are. They're at Panium.
mm,
And the gates of hell is a place in Panium,
okay.
right? So that's in northern Israel,
Israel.
right? Okay. The
Israel.
Battle of Raphia is I don't know its exact location, but it's in Greece, right?
Mm,
I believe.
mm. What does the word raffia mean? And panium? Panium, I think we connected to the word, or pandemic or something.
Well,
Pan.
yeah, it's just because of the pan,
Is it the
right?
word, the entomology, is it they call it? What's
Etymology,
the word for words?
etymology,
Etymology.
entomology
Mm-hmm.
is the study of insects.
Etymology. Insects. Yeah. That I'm qualified and trained in.
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, well, actually, Raphia is in Gaza.
Oh, okay.
It is in Israel as well. It's a Palestinian city in the southern Gaza Strip. Yeah, I knew that.
Okay.
I don't know why I forgot.
Yeah. It's early or late.
Yeah. Um, I went to bed a bit late. Um,
Hmm.
and I woke up
So did
a
I.
bit late.
Rick and I talked till 2 a.m., 3
Yeah.
a.m. his time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a place called Rafa. Okay. So
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Interesting. I'd not heard that. That never put together for me before. Actually, I thought of the question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. It bears in somewhere.
Okay. Dwight, you got anything yet?
I've just been listening to what you both have been talking about on this.
Okay.
Um, the direction that we seem to be looking at then gives us points of reference into 2021. Now, I'm in considering some of what was being said. I agree that there was a time period where the United States had no official representation to the Vatican. It was in 1968 that Nixon appointed a personal representative to the Vatican.
Okay.
Now, the
When
person,
was the oh
go ahead,
the a personal representative?
correct.
And then, is there a difference between a personal representative and a political ambassador?
Yes,
Mhm.
Okay.
as in an ambassador has an official government standing, a personal representative does not.
An ambassador
Mhm.
has an embassy as well.
Correct.
Right.
Now,
And an embassy is actually you're given a part of your country is placed in that country.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I believe that happened in 1987.
well,
Anyway, I'm distracting from your point there on the personal representatives. What year was that again?
okay, that
68.
was 68.
Oh,
Now, the official diplomatic relations with the Vatican began under Reagan in 1984. So
mhm.
when Reagan first appointed a direct ambassador was again 1984 when William Wilson was appointed as ambassador. Then after him was Frank Shakespeare. Bush had one ambassador. Clinton had two, with a third that overlapped into the situation with George W. Bush. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4 W. Bush. Barack Obama had 1, 2, and Trump has had 1. Now, the official ambassador under Biden did not take his office until April 11th of 2022. So here we have 411 as a symbol, but I was more intrigued by the fact that April 11th, 2022 on the biblical calendar would be the 9th day of the first month.
You left out Obama. Did he have one?
Uh, just a moment. The answer as far as this with Obama is yes. Obama had 2 ambassadors, but there was a time period where he could not get an ambassador approved, so they had a charge d'affaires for a year. And basically, that's a diplomat that serves as the embassy's chief of mission in the absence of an ambassador. So Obama had one, and Biden has had one because it took over a year before Joe Donnelly was approved as ambassador under Biden.
Question.
Yes,
So ambassadors have to be appointed with each president?
correct.
All ambassadors or just the Vatican?
All.
Okay.
Normally, an ambassadorial position is seen as being a plum posting, something that the incoming president is doing to favor either a major contributor or someone that they view as a political ally.
Mm-hmm.
Congress,
Lobby, almost a lobby connection.
almost.
Lobbying connection. Yeah.
Congress has the ability to approve an ambassador, just like Congress has the ability to approve federal judges. If Congress does not agree with the party being appointed, they can decline to vote or allow for the appointment of that ambassador. And you will find that specifically in 1951, because Harry Truman nominated Mark Clark, who was a World War II general and World War II hero, to be his emissary to the Vatican. Clark withdrew his nomination about 3 months later because there were protests from U.S. Senator from Texas and different Protestant groups because they didn't want to see such a close relationship between the United States and Rome.
How long was the excuse me, how long was that post vacant? U.S. Vatican ambassador?
Well, the first, there had been years where there had been a lot of communication and contact, diplomatic relationships between the U.S. and Rome. From 1797 to 1867, there had been diplomatic relationships, but there had not been any kind of ambassador.
That would be a 70-year period?
That's a 70-year period, definitely.
Yeah, and they have
Okay.
this. So there's the Papal States. Now, what are the Papal States?
The Papal States were part of the area that was controlled and ruled directly by the Pope.
Okay, and that's going to end in 1870. That they
Roughly,
cease
yes.
to exist.
Correct.
Well, it says here 1870. The
Right.
Papal States ceased to exist in 1870. So the United States has this diplomatic relation with the Papal States from 1797, before the Pope is taken captive,
Right.
to 1867. But the Papal States ceased to exist in 1870. So, I mean, I don't understand that history fully. All I know is that it lost its territory, it says here, to the city of Rome. The last territory, the city of Rome was the last territory they had. And that was lost to the kingdom of Italy. So Italy took over the city of Rome.
Correct.
And so from that point on, it says the international status of the papacy was controversial until 1929, when the Italian government agreed to the establishment of the Vatican City as a sovereign city-state. So we're going to have from 1870 to 1929.
Mussolini. Mussolini.
El
Mussolini
Duque,
reappoint or did that,
That,
was he? Was it?
that was when they was granted the statehood, right? The Vatican.
I believe that's correct.
Not state, but a sovereign nation, I think.
The Lateran
Like it,
Treaty. No, it's yeah, a sovereign city state.
So you
okay.
can see the progression. You can see
Yeah.
the progression of the papacy as it moves, right?
But
Yeah.
is it so that it's not a state of Italy, but rather a country within Italy?
Right.
Yes.
That's how I understand it. Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
And that was, I believe, Mussolini who brought that back.
Under the Lateran
19,
Treaty,
what
that's
year you
correct.
mentioned there, Dwight?
Yeah, the Lateran under the
Okay.
Lateran Treaty. Yeah. Okay. So what we see is we see that there's this history in which the papacy, ceases to exist as a city state. The papal state ceased to exist. Now we have, of course, February 15th, 1798, as the time of the end. Now, it doesn't mean that the papacy ended, right? I mean, the
Right.
papacy still continued, but it's marking the time of the end because of that 1260 years. There comes a point in which the United States rises up. That's going to be in 1798. And in connection with that, we have the Pope being taken captive. Separate events, but they're connected prophetically as the time of the end. And then we're going to have this progression of Rome coming back into power. First, it's going to lose a lot of its power, right? It's going to lose these city states. It's then going to become a city state, the Vatican, 1929. And then there's going to be this slow establishment of diplomatic relations with the United States. So the Holy See, as they call it here, says the United States was slow to establish full diplomatic relations with the reestablished Holy See, and partly due to the prevalence of anti-Catholicism in the United States. Right. So you got, Franklin D. Roosevelt. He opposed Postmaster General James Farley was the first highest ranking government official to normalize relations with the Holy See in 1933. Right. So you have this progression of connections with the Vatican. Now so we're going to have the first ambassador under Nixon. Now, it says here, I have actually 1969 President Richard Nixon changed this when he appointed as his personal representative Henry Cabot Lodge Jr.
Henry Cabot.
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 Canadian, we just say Cabot.
Understood.
Former U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Nixon's 1960 Republican vice presidential running mate, and a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. So, and then in 78, you're going to have Carter has an ambassador or a personal representative, pardon me, who was a former ambassador to Spain. So you're going to have these personal representatives. Now, what's an envoy?
Political envoy.
That's a status lower than an ambassador, I believe.
Okay. So some U.S. presidents had personal envoys. So that William Howard Taft, Myron Charles Taylor, Cabot Jr., David Walters, and Robert F. Wagner Jr. These were all personal envoys, I guess, is what they're saying. And then we have the ambassadors. So the first one is going to be William Wilson, 1984, under Ronald Reagan. Right?
Correct. It is interesting when you're looking like at the envoys, because William Howard Taft, who was later a president of the United States, was appointed as envoy by Theodore Roosevelt.
Yeah, 1902.
Now, keep in mind that of all of the ambassadors that have been appointed to Rome, all of them have been Catholic. But we cannot say that of the envoys. I don't know that we could say that of the heads of the U.S. delegations at Rome either.
Yeah. Now, so, I mean, and we're going to have Theodore Roosevelt doing this, this William Taft, right, being
Right.
A personal envoy. But the Vatican doesn't actually exist as a, because that's prior to the Lateran Treaty in 1929.
Correct.
So the next one is going to be, 1940, February
Right. Charles
1940,
Taylor.
Taylor. And that's going to be under what? That was Franklin Roosevelt?
That's Franklin Roosevelt, but it's also Harry Truman.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, yeah. But that's after the Vatican has been established. So I'm wondering how you can have this personal envoy to the Vatican when there is no Vatican in 1902. So just probably to the Pope himself. They're just,
That's very possible.
yeah. Okay.
I would think it would be an important relationship to try and maintain, whether it has official status or not, because they were the Vatican's power in the world. Like the U.S. would
Yeah.
recognize that. Same thing as like perhaps keeping some sort of political communication open, say between a country that's coming out of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. But this is still official.
And all of those.
This is still an official thing. The other presidents aren't going to be having these personal envoys until 1940. Right.
Oh, just once.
Yes.
Okay, so that's
During the time that the Vatican is no longer a papal state. So it's not until, and so in 1929, the Lateran Treaty occurs, but it's still going to be 11 years until you get the first personal envoy. But there is a personal envoy.
Where was that? Where was that 70-year period again, Dwight?
You mean from 1797 to 1867?
Yeah. Just want to mark that in my head. 1797. Okay.
What ain't that between World War One and World War Two? Just before World War Two,
No, sir.
it ain't.
1797 is 1 year before the time of the end as we would view it.
Right.
1867 is 2 years after the Civil War.
Oh, I'm talking about the World War One.
That's 1917, 1918, or if you're in Europe, 1914 to 1918.
Where 1929 is between them two wars, right?
That 1929 is definitely between World War I and World War II. Yes.
That's what I'm just curious.
Okay. No, it's quite interesting to see the progression on the list of these ambassadors as well.
Mm-hmm. So what we're saying here is we go back to Daniel 11, verse 11, right? The king of the south shall be moved with choler, shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. That is, the king of the north sets forth a great multitude, but the multitude's given into the hand of the king of the south, right? So that's the Battle of Raphia, right? And we know that that's the time of the end in 1798. So the Battle of Raphia parallels 1798 because the king of the south conquers the king of the north. And then we have this interim period to 1989. Now, in Daniel 11, verse 40, it doesn't discuss the interim period, right? It just gives you 1798 and 1989, right? But here in Daniel 11, we're looking at a history that's going to parallel that. And this history does have an interim period between 217 BC and 200 BC, right? And we
Right.
can look and we can say, well, that interim period of what's happening is paralleling what's happening between 1798 and 1989, right? That's what we're suggesting here, right? That what happened historically between the Battle of Raphia and the Battle of Panium is being symbolized by what had happened with the papacy from 1798 to its conquering of the King of the South in 1989. But it's going to do that through the United States. Now, if we look at the Battle of Raphia and we say, well, the Battle of Raphia doesn't have the papacy involved with it, right? That is, the king of the north here, which is Syria, it's going to lose to the king of the south, which is Egypt, right? So the king of the south here, in this context, is representing the king of the south is representing France. So the king of the north is going to lose to France, right? That is, the papacy is going to lose to France. So in this context, in the Battle of Raphia, Rome isn't involved. We have the king of the north and the king of the south. We have Greece, right? So that's how we're looking at this. This is a battle literally between these kingdoms, the division of the Greek kingdom, right?
Right.
But when we make a parallel with that, because later Rome becomes the king of the north as a symbol, right? The symbol of the king of north is going to be transferred to the papacy. So initially here, when we're dealing with the Battle of Raphia, we don't have Rome at all being represented, okay? So this is where we have to kind of think this through clearly. We're saying this is paralleling 1798. And so we can take the king of the north and the king of the south that happens in Daniel 11, verse 40b, or 40a, pardon me. And we can say, well, that's the papacy being taken captive by the king of the south, which is France. Now, then we look at this history, this interim period, but in this history, Rome is going to exalt itself to establish the vision, right? So Rome is now going to be introduced, and Rome here is, of course, pagan Rome, but it's going to parallel what happens in our history at the time of the end in 1989. Now, it's not going to be until verse 16, which is going to represent what happens in 191 BC, that we see Rome now being the next kingdom, because it's going to do according to his own will. So in Daniel 11:16, Rome itself becomes the king of the north, right?
Okay.
Because it's so there's this transition that happens. So if we're looking at verse 15, now Rome has exalted itself, but it's not the king of the north yet, right? In verse 15, when it says, the king of the north shall come, shall cast up a map and take the most fenced cities. That's not Rome, right? That's the king of the north. That's Syria, correct?
Right.
And it's going to conquer the king of the south. But then in verse 16, it says, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. And none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So that is, Rome comes in after after the king of the north defeats the king of the south, and Rome becomes the king of the north, right? Historically,
Historically,
right? So what we would say then in our history, that we just say, well, the king of the north is the papacy, right? But in this interim period, the papacy is not the king of the north. I mean, it is the king of the north, but because it's the king of the north in 1798, the United States becomes connected with the papacy, and thus the United States becomes the king of the north. But it's really still the papacy that's conquering the United States. Does that make sense to people?
it's a
Or
bit of
is it that the United States becomes the king of the north by being connected to the papacy?
I think that's a better way of looking at it.
Okay. Because the papacy is already the king of the north. So the United States becomes the king of the north in 1989. So it joins hands with the papal power. But of course, we know that's at the Sunday law, but it's progressive.
Correct.
So the United States becomes the king of the north. And of course, in our history, then the king of the south is the Soviet Union, right? But then when the Soviet Union falls, this is this combination of the United States and the papacy joining hands to take down the Soviet Union. But there is something within the Soviet Union that is this, and we're saying that it's the chosen people, the choicest people. It's nothing to do with the chosen people of God, neither his choicest people or his choicest people. Neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So we don't know whether his chosen people don't withstand. That's sort of the way they do it. But we would have to say that this is referring to the globalists, because that's the elite, the globalist elite. And so then when it says in verse 16, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his will, historically, that's going to be Rome. Are we going to say that now this is the United States in the present truth application? That's sort of how we seem to have done it.
So, but he that cometh against him. So the United States cometh against the globalists shall do according to the United States' own will, and none shall stand before the United States. And the United States shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed.
That's a paradigm shift. Because I understood it was the papacy coming into the glorious land.
If we're saying that the United States is taking the role of the king of the north, then this is the way we would be approaching this verse.
Okay, so can you say it again?
Sure.
Wait.
But he that cometh against him, but the United States that cometh against the globalists shall do according to the United States' own will, and none shall stand before the United States. And the United States shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed.
Yeah, and that doesn't make any sense. So
Well,
I don't think that's correct, right?
okay, but
So,
Steve,
but see, I don't agree with you, but that's how I would read that.
you just dropped out there.
So he that cometh against him. So the one that cometh against him is pagan Rome coming against Seleucid Syria,
Agreed.
right? So
If
Seleucid Syria is the king of the north, right? But the papacy is going to conquer the king of the north, that is the USA. So does that make sense? So he that cometh against him, he is the papacy, not the United States.
But if the United States is the army of the papacy, can't that be interchangeable?
No, not here, because we're dealing with the historic application making a parallel. And in the historical application, pagan Rome is the one that comes against Seleucid Syria, right? So in our history, it's the papacy that comes against the United States, right? Because
There's a comment from the chat basically saying U.S. elites agree with papacy to take over the U.S. Now, my next question very quickly, since our time is closing,
yeah,
shall we return to this tomorrow?
yeah, we're going to have to return to this tomorrow. Now, I'm not going to be here the 2 days after that.
I know.
So I will be here tomorrow. So this is something that we really have to hammer out. So we'll see what we can do. I'm not going to have much chance to look at it. I'll see if I can get some time to look at it before tomorrow. But I'm pretty busy here.
Okay.
So,
I think what we all need to do is give some consideration to this specific verse for today, so we can each come back with some kind of contribution to address this tomorrow.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing here is, we're looking at this history. Remember, we were dealing with 1870, that you're going to have that the Vatican or the papacy has no more papal states, and that's going to be in 1870.
Right.
And we had taken, because I have a chart here dealing with July 18, 1870.
Right.
And that's the lexical sum for Daniel 11, verse 16. If you count from July 18, 1870, and you take that number, which is 47,903 inclusive days, that goes from July 18, 1870 to September 11, 2001. Right? So if you remember that, right? So that was the vote for papal infallibility.
Right.
And so that's fitting into what we're saying about this interim period. That there's this connection between the end of the Vatican's papal states to September 11th in this Daniel 11, verse 16, because it's just, but we've already established that. That's what we're looking at. So that's what we have to sort out. So to see what's going to happen in our studies, like obviously tomorrow we'll look at this, and then I'm not here for 2 days, but I'm sure you guys will do fine. And then on Thursday I'll be back. So, we're probably going to have to deal with these, some more of this background, I think, over this week to really get this nailed down, to see if we can understand it better, because I don't think we understand it fully yet. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments at this point? Okay. Shall we then close our study with a word of prayer? Loving Father in heaven, we thank you for this time that we were able to spend together. We thank you for your direction and your guidance. We ask now, Father, for your blessing upon the days that are before us. We ask that you show us that which we should do in order to glorify you and to glorify your name. Be with us now, we ask. We thank you for all that you are doing with us and for us. In Jesus' name, amen.